Then Jake expanded his social circle to include other dangerous creatures. It started with the acid spitters that nested near the western ridge. They'd been classified as immediate threats due to their projectile capabilities and corrosive emissions. Jake just saw them as interesting creatures who might enjoy some company. He approached them the same way he had Mr. Whiskers: slow movements, friendly tone, and of course trail mix. The security team watched through binoculars with that particular blend of horror and fascination people get watching someone do something incredibly stupid that somehow works. Acid spitters that could dissolve spacecraft plating became gardening assistants. Their precise pH-controlled emissions turned out to be perfect for the experimental vegetable patch Jake started near the perimeter. They could adjust their spray to exactly the right acidity for different plants. The tomatoes especially loved the treatment, growing larger and more vibrant than any hydroponic variety back on the ship. What was once a lethal biological weapon became the most effective irrigation system anyone had ever seen. He named them Squirty, Splashy, and Bob, because of course he did. The naming convention followed no particular logic beyond what felt right in the moment. Squirty had a particular way of tilting its head before spraying. Splashy preferred short, precise bursts rather than continuous streams. Bob just looked like a bob. The creatures responded to these names with the same focused attention Mr. Whiskers showed, turning their multifaceted eyes toward Jake when he called them. Their pH-balanced acidity turned out to be perfect for watering tomato plants. The science team took samples and found the precise chemical composition actually enhanced plant growth while deterring pests. The tomatoes developed a slight metallic sheen and tasted unlike anything in the galactic database. What started as a curiosity became a proper agricultural project, with the acid spitters appearing at regular intervals to tend their charges. Venomous vine serpents, previously classified as lethal threats, became jump ropes. Their sinuous bodies and grab reflexes made them perfect for the purpose. Jake would approach them with that same calm demeanor, and they'd coil themselves into perfect looping shapes. Their venom remained dormant during these interactions, the fangs retracting harmlessly. It was the kind of thing that made security teams question their entire understanding of risk assessment. Daily exercise now included avoiding venomous fangs while skipping rope. The crew started joining in cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The vine serpents seemed to enjoy the game, adjusting their movements to match human rhythms. What was once a lethal hazard became part of the morning fitness routine. The medical team kept anti-venom handy just in case, but it never got used. Mr. Whiskers became the group's intimidating but oddly polite mascot. The creature would watch over the activities with what looked like approval. It never participated in the games but seemed to enjoy observing them. Its presence kept smaller predators away while the gardening and exercises happened. It had become the unofficial guardian of this strange little community they were building. The local ecosystem's agitated state turned out to be feeding time excitement, not aggression. The creatures everyone had classified as hostile were actually just enthusiastic about the social interactions. The rustling in the bushes, the increased movement patterns, the gathering of different species. It all signaled anticipation rather than threat. The planet wasn't hostile. It was just poorly understood. Predators exhibited social flexibility that hardwired galactic protocols never anticipated. They adapted to human presence not through dominance or submission, but through mutual interest. The creatures learned patterns of interaction that benefited everyone involved. They remembered feeding times, recognized individual humans, and even developed preferences for certain activities. Their intelligence wasn't predatory, it was social. What began as a rescue mission became an anthropological case study in cooperation. The science team started documenting these interactions with growing excitement. They observed how different species responded to positive reinforcement, how communication developed through consistent, non-threatening interaction, how the entire local ecosystem seemed to shift from hostile to collaborative once someone bothered to approach it properly. The Death Planet was becoming a living laboratory for interspecies relations. Then Admiral Boltfist of the Galactic Defense Coalition weighed in. His command ship arrived without warning, descending through the toxic atmosphere like a steel thundercloud. The man himself stepped onto the landing pad with that particular military bearing that suggests he considers gravity a suggestion rather than a law. His uniform had more medals than a museum display case. His eyes missed nothing, scanning the perimeter defenses, the research equipment, and finally resting on Mr. Whiskers, who was currently being scratched behind the ears by a nervous but determined intern. His perspective was brutally simple. Weaponizing these creatures is of extreme strategic interest. He said it while watching Mr. Whiskers slice through a sample of starship plating with casual ease. He noted how the acid spitters could precisely control their corrosive emissions. He observed the vine serpent's constriction strength and venom delivery systems. Every biological feature that had terrified the science team became a potential military asset in his assessment. His mind automatically converted threat profiles into tactical advantages. Traditional military doctrine saw predators as tools to be controlled and deployed. The Admiral's staff immediately began drafting containment protocols and deployment scenarios. They discussed neural implants for command control. They designed specialized transport cages and handling equipment. Their approach treated the creatures as living weapon systems rather than intelligent beings. Every solution involved dominance and restraint mechanisms. The concept of cooperation through mutual interest didn't appear in their operational manuals. Thornwick and Bloom-Pattle noted these changes weren't training, they were fundamental shifts. The creatures weren't obeying commands. They were choosing to participate. Their behavior showed adaptation and learning rather than conditioned response. The social bonds they'd formed with Jake appeared to be genuine connections rather than manipulative relationships. The science team's data showed neurological patterns associated with curiosity and social engagement rather than submissive behavior. Jake's method, gentle, persistent, snack-fueled, overrode coercive paradigms. He never raised his voice or made threatening gestures. He approached each interaction with open hands and patient repetition. The treats were offered, not used as rewards for compliance. The conversations were one-sided but consistently friendly. His entire approach assumed the creatures were intelligent beings capable of choice rather than animals needing domination. It suggested a deeper psychological mechanism rooted in social bonding, not dominance. The creatures responded to consistency and predictability. They recognized individual humans and showed preferences. They initiated interactions and offered gifts. Their behavior patterns indicated complex social intelligence that military protocols completely failed to address. The weapons-first approach might actually damage the very capabilities the Admiral wanted to exploit. The dichotomy created a tense conflict about the right path forward for species interaction. The military team wanted immediate control and deployment. The science team advocated for further study and understanding. Jake just kept doing what he'd been doing, unaware he'd become the center of an ideological battle. The two approaches represented fundamentally different views on how to engage with unknown life forms. Weaponization required control, but friendship required mutual respect and understanding. The military needed predictable, reliable tools that responded to commands. The creatures demonstrated autonomous decision-making and voluntary cooperation. Forcing compliance might destroy the very qualities that made them valuable. The respectful approach took time but preserved their unique capabilities intact. Boltfist's mindset met Jake's approach, and the universe held its breath. The Admiral watched Jake offer a vine serpent a piece of fruit while discussing its day. He saw Mr. Whiskers bring an interesting rock to trade for snacks. He observed the acid spitters carefully tending the tomato plants. The contrast between military efficiency and casual friendship created a visible tension in his posture. His professional certainty seemed to waver for the first time. The future of interstellar relations hung on whether snacks could defeat strategic imperatives. The entire philosophy of galactic exploration stood at a crossroads. One path led toward control and weaponization, the other toward understanding and cooperation. The decision would affect how humanity engaged with every new species they encountered. And it all came down to whether dried fruit and patient conversation could outweigh centuries of military doctrine. Thornwick's synthesis concluded human social evolution was uniquely powerful for bridging divides. His research showed that humanity's tendency toward empathy and cooperation wasn't a weakness. It was an adaptive advantage they'd been misapplying. Where other species developed thicker armor or sharper claws, humans developed better social skills. Their entire evolutionary path favored emotional intelligence and group dynamics over individual combat effectiveness. The doctor's papers filled with data showing how human neural pathways lit up differently during social interactions. Compared to other species, cooperation and emotional intelligence became tools more effective than weapons. Military strategists started including psychologists in planning sessions. Treaty negotiations involved emotional resonance scans alongside tactical assessments. The entire approach to conflict shifted from domination to understanding. Weapon systems remained available but saw less use. The galaxy discovered that knowing when someone felt threatened often proved more valuable than knowing how to threaten them. The universe seemed to have been waiting for a humane entry point all along. Species that had resisted contact for centuries began opening dialogues. Environments previously classified as hostile revealed themselves as misunderstood. The constant defensive posturing that had characterized space exploration gave way to cautious curiosity. It turned out many aggressive species were just waiting for someone to approach without weapons drawn. The galaxy had been full of potential friends who thought humans were the scary ones. Jake's philosophy, simple, observant, generous, revealed a universal truth about contact. His approach wasn't sophisticated diplomacy or advanced technology. It was basic human decency applied consistently. He listened more than he spoke. He offered before he asked. He assumed good intentions until proven otherwise. These weren't revolutionary concepts, they were things grandparents teach children. They just happened to work on a galactic scale nobody had tried them on before. Beings are fundamentally capable of friendship when given space, time, and trust. The research showed that even the most hostile-seeming creatures responded to consistent positive interaction. They didn't need to be dominated or controlled. They needed to be understood. The protocols emphasized patience over pressure, observation over action. The results demonstrated that friendship wasn't a human concept. It was a universal possibility waiting for the right conditions. The near-apocalyptic crisis transformed into a generative revolution of relations. What began as a potential disaster became the foundation for new interspecies partnerships. Trade routes opened where battle lines had been drawn. Research collaborations formed between previously hostile species. The entire tone of galactic interaction shifted from suspicion to cautious optimism. The Death Planet became a case study rather than a warning. Exploration reframed from conquest to connection throughout the galaxy. Ships now carried cultural ambassadors alongside scientists. First contact protocols emphasized mutual learning rather than information gathering. The goal became understanding rather than claiming. New worlds were approached as potential partners rather than resources. The entire ethos of space travel shifted from taking to sharing. Jake and Mr. Whiskers became living testaments to a hopeful cooperative cosmos. They toured diplomatic centers as examples of what was possible. Their simple interactions demonstrated more about interspecies relations than any textbook could capture. The creature's transformation from classified threat to teaching assistant became the symbol of the new approach. Their friendship proved that differences weren't barriers, they were just interesting variations. The galaxy's future belonged to those who chose snacks over show of force. Military budgets shifted toward cultural exchange programs. Weapons research funding moved to communication studies. The most valuable diplomats weren't the toughest negotiators but the best listeners. Success became measured in partnerships formed rather than territories claimed. The entire power structure reoriented around connection rather than control. The universe, as it turned out, just needed someone to ask it nicely if it wanted to be. Not conquered, not studied, not exploited, just acknowledged as worthy of respectful engagement. The simplest human gesture, offering food and friendship, proved more effective than centuries of military strategy. The great discovery wasn't a new weapon or technology. It was the realization that most beings, given the choice, would rather have a friend than a fight. Looking back, the academic endeavor's mission became legend for all the wrong reasons. The ship that launched as the most heavily fortified research vessel in the fleet ended up remembered for its snack budget rather than its security systems. The team that prepared for every conceivable disaster became famous for the one scenario they never anticipated. Their panic rooms and defense protocols gathered dust while their trail mix reserves became the most requested supply item. History has a way of rewriting your legacy based on what actually works rather than what you planned. They'd expected to study death and instead discovered the power of friendship. All those hazard assessments and threat classifications gave way to social bonding exercises. The instruments designed to measure toxicity levels ended up monitoring interspecies communication patterns. The security teams trained for combat found themselves organizing picnic schedules. The entire mission shifted from documenting ways to die to exploring ways to connect. The data became considerably more pleasant to analyze. Military strategists now included snack inventories and first contact kits. The standard issue gear expanded from weapons and armor to include assorted nuts and dried fruits. Logistics officers found themselves calculating calorie counts alongside ammunition supplies. Field manuals added chapters on proper treat presentation and positive reinforcement timing. The most important tactical decision became choosing between raisins and almonds for a given situation. Xenobiology textbooks were rewritten to include chapters on positive reinforcement. The sections on threat assessment now shared space with social bonding techniques. Students learned to analyze body language alongside biochemical markers. The curriculum shifted from how to survive encounters to how to enjoy them. Graduates entered the field with sampling containers and treat pouches instead of just specimen traps and tranquilizers. Mr. Whiskers became the galaxy's most famous ambassador with a taste for raisins. The creature appeared on diplomatic channels looking patient and slightly hopeful. Its image became associated with peaceful resolutions and productive negotiations. Children across systems recognized its distinctive silhouette and knew it preferred the dark raisins over the golden ones. The most feared predator in 3 sectors became a beloved public figure who occasionally appeared in educational videos about sharing. Jake's humble trail mix approach spawned academic papers and diplomatic initiatives. Universities established entire departments studying snack-based diplomacy. Research grants funded investigations into which foods worked best with different species. Diplomatic missions began with food exchanges rather than formal presentations. The simple act of offering treats became a legitimate field of scientific inquiry and political strategy. The fear-based protocols that dominated for centuries were retired in favor of curiosity. The massive binders of emergency procedures became historical artifacts rather than active guidelines. Security teams trained in de-escalation instead of engagement. The default approach shifted from assuming hostility to expecting interesting interactions. The entire philosophy of space exploration became considerably more pleasant for everyone involved. Even Admiral Boltfist became an advocate for what he called snack-based détente. The man who once planned orbital bombardments now discussed the strategic value of fruit and nut combinations. His military briefings included sections on intercultural communication and gift-giving etiquette. He became known for carrying trail mix in his uniform pockets during diplomatic functions. The transformation was both surprising and entirely logical given the results. The most fortified research base in the galaxy became a friendship center. The electrified fences came down, replaced by welcoming paths and meeting areas. The defense turrets were reprogrammed to dispense snacks. The security stations became information kiosks for visiting species. The place designed to withstand attacks became known for its excellent hospitality and interesting conversation. And it all started because one intern didn't read the safety manuals properly. While everyone else studied containment procedures and hazard protocols, Jake was looking at pictures of local wildlife and wondering what they might like to eat. His failure to follow established guidelines accidentally revealed their limitations. Sometimes not knowing the rules means you're free to discover better ones. Jake's curiosity wasn't just academic. It had that disaster movie trope quality to it. He'd press his face against the observation glass with actual wonder in his eyes. He'd ask questions about predator behavior that sounded less like scientific inquiry and more like planning to make friends. His interest in the local ecosystem felt personal, like he was sizing up neighbors rather than studying threats. He moved with the cheerful confidence of someone who's never actually been hurt before. And on day 3 he proved every worst fear correct by walking away from camp with minimal gear. Just a basic environment suit, a sample kit, and what looked like a sandwich from the mess hall. No emergency beacon, no weapon, no secondary oxygen supply. He just undogged the airlock during a shift change and stepped out into the poisonous atmosphere, like he was going for a stroll in the park. The motion sensors picked him up immediately, of course. The security team watched him walk directly toward the densest concentration of predator signals on their scans. Then came the radio silence, that special kind of quiet that makes professionals sweat. The communications team kept cycling through frequencies, adjusting gain, running diagnostic after diagnostic on equipment that showed no malfunctions. That empty hiss on the speakers became louder than any alarm. People started leaning forward in their chairs as if proximity to the console might somehow pull a signal from the void. The technician developed a nervous tic of tapping her headset every 30 seconds as if testing whether it was still working. 72 hours without contact from the intern who thought acid-spitting creatures were neat. The timeline stretched from concerning to catastrophic in precise increments. Hour 12 brought concerned murmurs about suit oxygen limitations. Hour 24 saw the medical team preparing emergency response protocols for environmental exposure. By hour 48, people stopped making optimistic predictions altogether. The 72-hour mark arrived with the grim finality of a clock striking midnight on someone's survival chances. Thornwick's panic shifted from academic to full-blown, heart-pounding terror. His hands shook so badly he had to clutch them behind his back during briefings. The data streams he'd been obsessing over suddenly felt meaningless next to that yawning absence on their scanners. He started muttering probability calculations about survival rates in Cathara 7's wilderness that made nearby staff visibly uncomfortable. The man looked like he was watching his career and possibly his sanity evaporate with each passing minute of static. Bloom Patel initiated search protocols that would make a special forces team nod with respect. She deployed 3 different drone patterns with overlapping sensor coverage. She had ground teams in full combat gear prepping for possible recovery operations. The mapping department produced terrain analysis charts, showing the most likely paths and potential hazard zones. Every piece of technology on the ship suddenly became part of the search grid. She moved through the command center with that focused intensity that makes junior officers jump to attention without being told. The crew's fracture lines started showing that fine edge where professionalism meets raw fear. The science team argued with security about risk assessment models. The medical staff questioned whether search protocols were worth potential additional casualties. People who'd worked together for years started snapping over minor procedural disagreements. That carefully maintained veneer of competence began developing hairline cracks that spread with each negative sensor sweep. They'd prepared for every scenario except one. The intern might actually be stupid enough to get himself killed. All their protocols assumed rational actors following basic survival instincts. Their contingency plans accounted for equipment failure, environmental hazards, even hostile fauna encounters, but not for someone willingly walking into obvious danger while apparently enjoying the scenery. The security team's betting pool suddenly didn't seem funny anymore. The assumption became presumed digested, not dead, not injured, but actively being processed by something. The medical officer started talking about digestive enzyme exposure timelines. The science team discussed which local predators had the fastest metabolic rates. People stopped using euphemisms and started using uncomfortably specific biological terminology. That academic detachment they'd maintained began crumbling into grim reality. Every shadow outside the perimeter became a potential threat. Every noise a predator's approach. Security teams jumped at normal nocturnal animal movements. The automated defense systems got triggered by falling branches twice, flooding the compound with blinding emergency lights. People stopped looking out the observation windows altogether. The external cameras showed nothing but shifting shadows that might have been wind or might have been death approaching. The weight of extraterrestrial threat pressed down until the air itself felt heavy with dread. The environmental systems kept pumping perfectly balanced atmosphere, but everyone breathed a little shallower. Conversations dropped to whispers even in soundproofed areas. The cheerful mission logos on the wall started looking like ironic reminders of their failed optimism. That initial professional excitement curdled into something darker and more personal. They'd lost not just a team member, but any illusion of control over this death world. All their technology, their protocols, their expertise, none of it mattered against the sheer indifferent hostility of the environment. The fortified base suddenly felt less like protection and more like a cage. The planet had demonstrated its fundamental nature in the simplest way possible, by taking their most vulnerable member and leaving only silence behind. On day 12, Thornwick had the realization that changed everything. He was reviewing the security footage for the 20th time, watching Jake offer another handful of trail mix to Mr. Whiskers. The creature took it with that same gentle precision it always showed. Something clicked in the doctor's mind that had nothing to do with xenobiology or threat assessment. It was simpler than that and somehow more profound. He reached for his datapad with hands that didn't shake for once. "It's not what humans do," he wrote. "It's what humans don't do." The words appeared on the screen looking both obvious and revolutionary. He stared at them for a long moment before continuing. All their training, all their technology, all their protocols, they focused on action and reaction. But Jake's approach involved restraint rather than action. He didn't do the things they'd been trained to do, and that made all the difference. He contrasted humanity's historical aggression with this counterexample. The records showed centuries of first contact scenarios that involved show of force and defensive posturing. Even friendly approaches came with weapons readiness and containment protocols. The standard procedure assumed hostility until proven otherwise. Jake had flipped that assumption without even realizing he was doing it. His entire method started from curiosity rather than caution. Jake didn't greet Mr. Whiskers with weapons or threats. He offered curiosity and snacks. That simple choice created an entirely different dynamic from the beginning. The creature never had to decide whether to fight or flee. It never faced aggression that required a defensive response. The interaction started neutral and became positive through consistent, non-threatening behavior. The absence of hostility allowed for something else to develop. This wasn't about technology or strength. It was about emotional intelligence and social approach. Jake's psychology background had given him tools he didn't even know he was using. He understood about reading body language, about establishing trust through consistency, about positive reinforcement. These weren't weapons or shields. They were social skills applied to a situation everyone else treated as military engagement. The human tendency toward empathy and non-threatening curiosity became the key. Where professionals saw biological weapon systems, Jake saw potential friends. Where scientists calculated threat probabilities, he wondered about dietary preferences. That shift in perspective changed everything about the interaction. It wasn't about dominating or controlling. It was about understanding and connecting. Boltfist began shifting from weapon-centric thinking to cautious observation. The Admiral started spending more time watching the interactions than reviewing weaponization proposals. He saw how the creatures responded to different humans. He noted how they initiated contact when treated with respect. The military mind began acknowledging there might be approaches beyond force. The change happened slowly, but it happened. Centuries of fear-based defense started giving way to exploratory diplomacy. The security protocols began including sections on non-threatening approaches. The science team developed new classification systems that included social compatibility ratings. The entire expedition's purpose shifted from studying dangers to understanding possibilities. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped driving every decision. Jake's logs revealed he saw Mr. Whiskers as a really big kitty who needed a friend. That simple statement contained more insight than all the threat assessment databases combined. He wasn't analyzing claws or calculating acid pH levels. He was seeing a living being that might be lonely. The perspective was childlike in its simplicity and revolutionary in its implications. That perspective, more than any technology, became the breakthrough. Weapons could be countermeasured, defense systems could be breached, but a genuine offer of friendship? That was something entirely different. It wasn't something you could fight against or defend against. It was either accepted or rejected, but it changed the nature of the interaction regardless. The universe had been waiting for someone to try asking nicely instead of preparing for war. Then they witnessed Jake's circle-time approach to predator disputes. He'd gather the creatures in a rough circle near the perimeter fence, sitting cross-legged on the ground like a kindergarten teacher conducting story hour. The acid spitters would arrange themselves with careful precision. Mr. Whiskers would loom over the group with that patient expression. The vine serpents coiled into attentive loops. It looked like the most dangerous preschool class in the galaxy. He used a talking stick and social etiquette training among creatures that could melt metal. The stick was just a polished branch he'd found, but it became the central object of their conflict resolution sessions. Whoever held the stick had the floor to express their concerns without interruption. The creatures learned to wait their turn, passing the stick with surprising gentleness considering their capabilities. The sessions involved basic manners, taking turns, sharing resources, using inside voices. Mr. Whiskers learned to play dead for entertainment under Jake's supervision. The creature would collapse with dramatic flair, all four legs in the air, tongue lolling out in what looked like a grin. It became their favorite game during breaks. The security team watched through binoculars as the galaxy's most feared predator, pretended to be deceased for the amusement of its friends. The contrast between capability and behavior became increasingly surreal. Conflict resolution involved high fives and gentle touch rather than violence. When disputes arose over food or attention, Jake introduced physical gestures to ease tensions. The creatures learned to touch claws or appendages gently instead of attacking. The acid spitters developed a soft spraying technique that just misted the air without causing damage. The vine serpents would loop around each other briefly instead of constricting. Everything became about de-escalation through connection. The Shadow Stalker demonstrated problem-solving techniques that involved patience. When food got stuck in a high tree, Mr. Whiskers would sit and consider the problem rather than just tearing the tree down. It developed a method of carefully shaking specific branches until the fruit fell. It learned to work with the acid spitters to clear obstacles using precise chemical applications. Its intelligence shifted from hunting strategies to cooperative solutions. Security apparatus was repurposed from deterrence to observation and positive reinforcement. The defense turrets now dispensed treats when creatures approached peacefully. The motion sensors tracked social interactions instead of threats. The perimeter fence became a meeting place rather than a barrier. The entire security budget got redirected towards snack acquisition and behavioral research. The weapons stayed operational but largely forgotten. Thornwick documented the dramatic decline in aggression and rise of social bonding. His notes filled with graphs showing reduced defensive posturing and increased cooperative behavior. The creatures started grooming each other during breaks. They developed what looked like friendships across species lines. Their group dynamics showed complex social structures that nobody had anticipated. The data challenged every existing model of predator behavior. Boltfist questioned the viability of traditional warfare in this new paradigm. He watched creatures that could shred tanks sitting quietly and sharing food. He saw lethal capabilities being used for gardening and games. The entire concept of military engagement started seeming crude and ineffective. His staff began discussing whether dominance-based strategies might actually be counterproductive when dealing with intelligent life. Cooperation and humor unlocked behavioral changes previously thought impossible. The creatures developed what looked like inside jokes, particular sounds or gestures that would make them all react with what could only be described as laughter. They started inventing new games together. They showed concern for injured members of the group. Their interactions became increasingly complex and nuanced over time. The most dangerous creatures in the galaxy were learning to share and take turns. They'd line up for treats without pushing or fighting. They'd wait patiently when others were using favorite toys or spaces. They developed a system of rotation for prime resting spots. The behaviors mirrored what you'd see in a well-run classroom, just with more claws and acid secretions. The Death Planet had become something entirely different through the power of basic social skills. Meanwhile, what was Jake actually doing while they thought he was being digested? He'd wandered about half a kilometer from the base when his environment suit's oxygen indicator started blinking. Instead of panicking, he just took the helmet off. The air smelled like rain and something faintly sweet. Nothing like the toxic death brew the sensors had warned about. He found his lungs worked fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt more clear-headed than he had in weeks. The suit went into emergency mode, beeping about atmospheric hazards, so he took the whole thing off and left it under a tree. It kept chirping sadly as he walked away. He'd found a stream with glowing fish that looked like swimming neon signs. The water moved clear and cool over smooth black stones, and little bioluminescent creatures darted just under the surface. Their light shifted between blue and green in soft pulses. He dipped his hand in and the water felt perfectly normal. None of the corrosive properties the lab reports had promised. A few of the fish came up to investigate his fingers, their glow intensifying briefly before they slid back into the current. He sat there for what felt like hours just watching the light show. There were cotton candy berries that tasted like childhood memories and didn't poison him. They grew on low bushes with silver leaves, clusters of fluffy-looking fruit that dissolved on the tongue with a sweetness that reminded him of carnival treats from back home. He ate a handful, waiting for some kind of reaction. Nothing happened except he felt pleasantly full and a little more awake. The safety manuals had graphic illustrations of what alien berries could do to human digestive systems, but these just tasted like nostalgia and sugar. The Death Planet, from his perspective, was basically a sylvan paradise with better special effects. Purple trees with leaves that shimmered like oil on water. Flowers that changed color when you walked past them. Gentle slopes covered in soft moss that felt like carpet under his boots. The constant hum of life everywhere. Chittering, rustling. The occasional distant call that sounded more curious than threatening. None of it matched the descriptions of a nightmare world. It felt like someone had taken a nice forest and added some creative lighting. His fear didn't just diminish. It transformed into pure, unadulterated curiosity. That initial nervousness melted away by the second hour when nothing tried to eat him. The overwhelming feeling became wonder instead of dread. He started noticing patterns in the way plants grew, how animals moved, the little ecosystems operating all around him. The panic he'd felt back at base seemed silly now, like being afraid of a fireworks display. Instead of running from strange noises, he followed them to see what made them. A rustle in the undergrowth became an invitation rather than a warning. He tracked the sound to a small creature with too many legs building a nest from glowing twigs. A deep humming vibration led him to a field of crystalline flowers that resonated in the wind. Every odd noise became a question waiting for an answer rather than a threat needing avoidance. The dangerous flora became interesting plants rather than potential causes of death. The vicious predatory vines mentioned in the briefing just seemed like they wanted to touch things. They'd curl around his wrist gently when he reached out, then release after a moment. The spore-emitting fungi puffed out colorful clouds that smelled like cinnamon and didn't seem to do anything except make the air taste interesting. Even the supposedly flesh-eating shrubs just had leaves that felt unusually soft against his skin. His minimal gear turned out to be perfect for what he was actually doing: exploring. Without the heavy suit, he could move quietly and feel the environment properly. The sample containers held berries and interesting leaves instead of hazardous materials. His camera captured the dancing lights and color-shifting flora. The emergency rations remained unopened because the local food worked fine. Everything he needed fit in his pockets, leaving his hands free for climbing and touching things. While the team imagined him being torn apart, he was having the time of his life. He found a warm rock overlooking a valley and watched 6-winged birds perform aerial dances. He discovered that some of the larger trees had bark that stayed warm to the touch even at night. The constant daylight cycle meant he never felt tired, just endlessly fascinated. He started keeping a mental catalog of all the things that didn't match the mission briefing. The dramatic irony was so thick you could build a wall with it. Back at the base, they were running search patterns for his dismembered remains, while he was trying to teach a multi-legged animal to fetch sticks. They discussed digestive enzymes and mortality rates while he napped in a sunbeam that came through the purple leaves. The entire security team was armed to the teeth looking for a corpse, while the subject of their search was having what might be the best day of his life. Then on day 4, it happened. The brush moved in a way that wasn't just wind. The leaves rustled with a rhythm that suggested something bigger than the usual 6-winged birds. The air stilled for a moment, the way it does when something important is about to occur. Jake paused his berry picking and turned toward the sound. He didn't tense up or look for cover. He just watched with that same open curiosity he'd been using on everything else. The shadow stalker emerged with all the predatory grace the reports promised. It didn't burst from the foliage or charge. It simply flowed into the clearing like ink spreading through water. Every movement was economical and precise, muscles coiling and releasing with a quiet power that seemed to absorb the light around it. The creature stood there regarding him with eyes that showed more intelligence than any animal should possess. It didn't snarl or posture. It just existed there, taking up space in a way that felt inevitable. Titanium green enforced claws that could shred spacecraft plating, acid saliva that could melt through metal. Those claws weren't extended in threat. They just rested against the ground with the casual confidence of tools that knew their own capabilities. A faint acidic scent hung in the air around its mouth, the kind of smell that makes your eyes water if you think about it too hard. The reports hadn't exaggerated the physical specs. They'd just gotten the context completely wrong. Enhanced stealth capabilities made it appear almost like a living shadow. One moment it was there, the next it seemed to dissolve into the background patterns of light and vegetation. It didn't vanish exactly. It just became part of the environment in a way that defied normal visual processing. Your eyes kept wanting to slide off it, to register it as just another shadow pattern under the purple leaves. The effect was mildly hypnotic rather than terrifying. Everything the team feared, Everything the classifications warned about stood before him. All those emergency briefings and hazard assessments condensed into one living creature, the hours of training videos showing simulated attacks, the security team's grim demonstrations of what those claws could do to reinforced materials, the medical officer's detailed explanations of acid exposure treatment protocols. It was all there in front of him, real and breathing and watching him back. Jake's response? He reached into his pocket and pulled out trail mix. The crinkling of the foil package sounded absurdly loud in the quiet clearing. He didn't move quickly or make any sudden gestures. Just a slow, deliberate reach into his pocket like he was looking for his keys. The mix was the standard issue kind. Nuts, raisins, a few chocolate bits if you were lucky. Nothing special, just the same snack they'd been eating in the mess hall for days. "Hey there," he said like he'd just met a neighbor's dog, rather than a Class A galactic threat. His tone was the same conversational pitch he used when talking to the kitchen staff about the dinner menu. No fear, no tension, just that easy familiarity he brought to everything. The creature's ears, or what passed for ears, twitched slightly at the sound. Its head tilted in a way that suggested curiosity rather than aggression. He offered nuts and raisins, describing them as the universal currency of friendship. He held out a small pile in his palm, not too close, not too far. Just an open offering without any demand behind it. The mix looked ridiculously ordinary against his skin, just dried fruit and nuts against a backdrop of lethal alien biology. He didn't try to explain what it was or make a big production out of it. Just held it there like this was a completely normal interaction. The creature approached with predator power but stopped at the offered snack. It didn't creep or stalk. It just flowed forward until its head was level with his hand. Those titanium claws could have removed his arm at the shoulder, but they stayed relaxed at its sides. The acid-scented breath washed over his hand, but the skin didn't blister or melt. A long, dark tongue emerged and delicately collected the trail mix from his palm. The movement was surprisingly gentle for something that could shred metal. In that moment, centuries of lethal first contact doctrine began to unravel. All those protocols about establishing dominance, showing strength, maintaining defensive postures, they just evaporated into the Cathera 7 atmosphere. The creature took the snack, made a soft clicking sound deep in its throat, and settled back on its haunches to regard him with what might have been approval. Jake just smiled and reached for another handful, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. 3 weeks after the breakthrough, the promotion ceremony made it official. They held it right there on the landing pad with Mr. Whiskers as guest of honor. The Admiral himself pinned the new rank insignia on Jake's collar, while the creature watched with what looked like approval. The security team stood at attention, but their weapons remained pointed at the ground. The science team applauded with genuine enthusiasm for once. That tense atmosphere of dread had completely evaporated, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like optimism. Jake went from intern to director of interspecies relations in record time. The paperwork bypassed normal channels on special orders from the Admiral's office. His new title came with authorization to develop experimental contact protocols and a budget for snack acquisition that would make a grocery store jealous. His office moved from the shared intern cubicle to a proper suite with viewports looking out over the now friendly landscape. The promotion felt less like a reward and more like common sense finally catching up with reality. The Galactic Defense Coalition adopted the Murphy protocols for first contact situations. They replaced 3 centuries of defensive posturing with a simple checklist that started with offer snacks and ended with be patient. The new guidelines emphasized open hands over raised weapons. They recommended learning basic social customs before deploying security teams. The entire approach shifted from assuming hostility to expecting curiosity. Military strategists found themselves studying psychology texts instead of weapons, manuals. Thornwick proclaimed Jake's methods resolved more conflicts than the entire diplomatic corps. His research paper compared incident rates before and after the protocol change. The data showed dramatic reductions in hostile encounters across multiple planetary systems. Traditional diplomacy had focused on treaties and negotiations. Jake's approach focused on shared meals and casual conversation. The results spoke for themselves in reduced casualties and increased cooperation. Jake humbly credited snacks and shared experiences for the breakthroughs. He declined to take personal credit during his acceptance speech. He just held up a bag of trail mix and talked about how food transcends species barriers. He mentioned that most creatures just want to be understood. His entire philosophy boiled down to treating others how you'd want to be treated, with extra emphasis on the treating part involving actual treats. Case histories began being rewritten across the galaxy. The Regalian death marshes were reclassified as community gardens, after researchers discovered the killer plants just needed regular pruning and complements. The vegan crystal wasps formed an interstellar honey cooperative, once someone thought to ask them what they wanted instead of just incinerating their nests. Kepler 442b's Nightmare Forest now offered guided tours with complimentary fruit baskets after the terrifying predators turned out to be enthusiastic amateur naturalists. The era of predator as threat gave way to cooperative coexistence experiments. Research vessels started carrying gift baskets instead of extra ammunition. Security teams trained in conflict de-escalation rather than threat neutralization. The entire approach to space exploration shifted from conquest to conversation. What began as one intern's failure to follow safety protocols became the new standard for interstellar relations. The galaxy became slightly less terrifying and considerably more interesting. By 6 months, Jake was teaching diplomacy at the galaxy's premier Friendship Studies Center. The facility had been converted from an old military academy, the parade grounds now hosting picnic tables instead of drill formations. His classroom featured comfortable chairs arranged in circles rather than rows. The walls displayed artwork from various species instead of tactical maps. Students called him Professor Murphy now, though he still dressed like someone who might fetch your coffee. Mr. Whiskers served as teaching assistant and living example of the approach. The creature had its own small desk near the front, though it mostly preferred to lounge near the snack table. It would demonstrate proper greeting postures and conflict resolution techniques. Students learned to read its body language signals, the ear twitch that meant patience was needed, the tail flick that suggested a topic required more discussion. Its presence made abstract concepts immediately tangible. The curriculum expanded to ambassadors, Klingon generals, and Centurion diplomats. The classes mixed species that had been at war for generations. Former enemies found themselves sharing snacks and practicing active listening exercises. The coursework included field trips to previously hostile environments, where students would practice the protocols firsthand. Graduates returned to their governments with new perspectives and bags of trail mix. General Vera received a red pencil from the Shadow Stalker as a bridge between strength and cooperation. The Klingon commander had initially approached the class with visible skepticism, his weapons conspicuously holstered but very present. Mr. Whiskers offered the pencil during a break, placing it gently on the general's datapad. The gesture, a tool for planning rather than fighting, seemed to resonate. Vrya kept it on his uniform thereafter. Mr. Whiskers' bow tie made from alien vegetation became a symbol of interspecies goodwill. The creature had taken to wearing it during special lectures, the vibrant leaves contrasting with its dark fur. Students started making similar accessories from their native plants. The fashion spread through diplomatic circles as a quiet signal of allegiance to the new approach. Something about the silliness of it made the message more powerful. Jake's message: most creatures are probably just as nervous about meeting you as you are about meeting them. He repeated this during every orientation, watching hardened warriors absorb the concept. The idea that fear might be mutual changed how they approached first contact scenarios. They started considering the other side's perspective before planning defensive measures. The shift seemed simple but proved revolutionary in practice. His psychology major gained academic legitimacy as the galaxy adopted his methods. Universities that had dismissed the discipline as soft science suddenly developed entire departments focused on interspecies social dynamics. Research grants shifted from weapons development to communication studies. Jake's old textbooks became required reading at military academies. The guy who barely passed his statistics exam was now cited in doctoral dissertations. Diplomacy reframed from show-of-force ritual to shared, snack-fueled adventure. Treaty negotiations now began with meal sharing rather than threat exchanges. Border disputes involved taste-testing local delicacies while discussing boundaries. Trade agreements got worked out over cooking demonstrations instead of in sterile conference rooms. The entire process became more human, even when the participants weren't human. Klingon generals started taking notes on positive reinforcement techniques, their datapads filled with observations about reward schedules and behavioral conditioning. They discussed how to apply these methods to tense standoffs and territorial disputes. The warriors who'd built careers on intimidation now debated the most effective ways to build trust through consistent, positive interactions. Their battle plans began including psychological approaches alongside tactical ones. The galaxy's toughest warriors were learning to make friends instead of war. They practiced active listening in full battle gear. They role-played conflict resolution scenarios while maintaining defensive postures. The transformation wasn't about becoming soft. It was about adding new tools to their existing skill sets. The most dangerous beings in known space were discovering that sometimes the strongest move was offering a snack and waiting to see what happened next. So Jake did what humans do when faced with something terrifying. He gave it a cute name. The Shadow Stalker became Mr. Whiskers after about 20 minutes of trail mix distribution. The name emerged from somewhere in his childhood memories of family pets and Saturday morning cartoons. He said it out loud once just to see how it felt, and it stuck because the creature tilted its head in what looked like recognition. The contrast between the name and the reality should have been jarring, but somehow it felt perfectly natural in the moment. Mr. Whiskers emerged not from scientific classification, but from pure, unadulterated anthropomorphism. Jake looked at those titanium claws and saw something that needed scratching behind imaginary ears. The acid saliva became just a quirky feature like a cat that drooled too much. The enhanced stealth capabilities translated into being good at hide and seek. The entire terrifying biological package got reframed through the lens of domestic animal behavior. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't even logical, but it worked. The most dangerous predator in 3 sectors now had a name you'd give a friendly neighborhood cat. Galactic threat classifications meant nothing next to that simple linguistic choice. All those emergency protocols and security briefings evaporated under the weight of 2 silly words. The creature that could dismantle spacecraft now answered to something you'd yell across a backyard when dinner was ready. The dissonance should have been overwhelming. But Jake just kept using the name like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Jake's logs later revealed he thought it was a really big kitty who needed a friend. His personal notes described the creature's behavior in terms of feline mannerisms he remembered from Earth. The way it moved, the head tilts, even the particular sound it made when pleased, all got filtered through that domestic animal framework. He noted how it seemed lonely rather than hostile, how its initial approach felt more like curiosity than hunting behavior. The logs read like someone describing a stray cat they were trying to befriend. This wasn't domestication in the traditional sense. It was social rebranding on a galactic scale. Jake wasn't trying to train or control the creature. He was simply interacting with it using social cues that felt natural to him. The trail mix became treats rather than bait. The conversations became companionship rather than manipulation. The entire relationship built on a foundation of mutual curiosity rather than dominance. It was less about changing the creature's behavior and more about changing how humans might perceive it. The Shadow Stalker responded to the name, or at least to the tone in which it was delivered. When Jake said Mr. Whiskers in that particular friendly tone, the creature would focus its attention on him. It might not understand the words, but it clearly recognized the positive association. The name became a signal that preceded food or interesting interactions. Over time, it began approaching when called, not with predatory intensity, but with what looked like anticipation. Trail mix diplomacy established a pattern of positive reinforcement over threat response. Every interaction started with the offering of snacks rather than defensive posturing. The creature learned that human presence meant interesting food and calm conversation, rather than danger or conflict. The acid saliva stayed where it belonged. The claws remained retracted. The entire relationship built around shared moments of peaceful coexistence rather than power dynamics. Jake's psychology major background suddenly became relevant in ways nobody anticipated. All those classes on social behavior and positive reinforcement theory found practical application. He understood about building trust through consistent, non-threatening interactions. He knew about the power of routine and predictable behavior in establishing bonds. His academic knowledge became the unspoken framework for how he approached the creature, though he'd never admit it was anything more than being friendly. He wasn't training an animal. He was making friends with something everyone else feared. The distinction mattered because training implies control, while friendship implies mutual respect. He never tried to make the creature do anything. He just offered company and snacks and let the relationship develop naturally. There were no commands, no expectations, just the simple offer of companionship between two beings who found each other interesting. And Mr. Whiskers, against all evolutionary logic, seemed to appreciate the company. The creature began seeking Jake out, appearing near his camping spot at regular intervals. It would bring interesting leaves or shiny rocks like offerings. It learned to approach slowly rather than using its stealth capabilities. The most fearsome predator in known space started acting like a companion animal because someone finally treated it like one instead of a monster. Then came the moment that redefined everything. Jake walked back to camp. He emerged from the purple foliage like someone returning from a pleasant hike, not someone who'd been missing for days on a death planet. His clothes were a bit rumpled but intact. His face had what looked like a sunburn, and he moved with that same easy stride he'd always had. There was no panic in his movements, no urgency. He just walked toward the perimeter fence like he was coming back from checking the mail. Not running, not screaming, not being chased, just walking casually. His hands were in his pockets, his head tilted back like he was enjoying the strange sunlight filtering through the violet leaves. He even paused to examine an interesting flower near the path. The security team watching the cameras actually rubbed their eyes like they couldn't trust what they were seeing. Everyone had prepared for worst-case scenarios, but nobody had prepared for this particular brand of normalcy. And Mr. Whiskers followed him like an overly large, extremely dangerous puppy. The creature moved with that liquid grace that defied its size, keeping pace about 3 meters behind Jake. Its claws made soft impressions in the soil without tearing it up. Its head swiveled occasionally to take in the surroundings, but its main focus remained on the human walking ahead. The contrast between Jake's casual stroll and the lethal perfection of the predator's movement should have been terrifying, but somehow it just looked domestic. The perimeter alarms went off with the intensity of a small supernova. Every warning system they'd installed started screaming at once. Motion sensors, thermal detectors, biological signature scanners. They all registered the approaching threat simultaneously. The main console lit up with so many red alerts it looked like it was bleeding. The sound was deafening. That combination of high-pitched wails and deep klaxons that means something has gone terribly wrong. Security teams scrambled to stations they'd hoped they'd never have to use. Thornwick's instruments probably short-circuited from the paradox they were recording. His atmospheric sensors showed the creature emitting chemical signatures that should have been fatal to humans at that proximity. His biological scanners detected acid levels that could dissolve the fence posts. His motion trackers showed something moving with silent efficiency that shouldn't have been possible for its mass. The data streams conflicted so violently with the visual evidence that the system started throwing error messages. The doctor just stared at his screens like they'd started speaking another language. Bloom Patel's protocols didn't have a section for intern returns with apex predator as friend. Her binders contained procedures for hostile encounters, medical emergencies, environmental disasters, and even alien first contact scenarios. None of them covered this particular combination of circumstances. She stood there flipping through emergency response manuals while watching the camera feed, her mouth moving slightly like she was trying to find the right words for a situation that had no words. The crew's weapons were aimed but not fired, because what do you do in that situation? Pulse rifles tracked the creature's movement. Defense turrets swiveled to maintain targeting solutions. But nobody pulled a trigger. The sight of Jake walking calmly with the predator following obediently created too much cognitive dissonance. They'd been trained to respond to clear threats, and this didn't match any threat profile they'd studied. The security team held their positions with frozen uncertainty. Jake's casual, "Hey guys, look who I found," might be the greatest understatement in xenobiology. He waved toward the security cameras with that same cheerful grin he used to use when bringing donuts to early meetings. His tone suggested he'd discovered an interesting rock formation rather than befriending a creature that could dismantle their entire base. The statement hung in the air through the comm system while everyone tried to process its sheer absurdity. Mr. Whiskers sat down outside the perimeter, waiting for more trail mix apparently. The creature settled onto its haunches with a quiet grace, its attention fixed on Jake rather than the weapons pointed at it. Its tail made a soft, sweeping motion in the soil that could have been threatening if it weren't for the patient way it waited. It showed no interest in the armed humans or the defensive systems. It just watched Jake with what looked like expectation. The team's worst-case scenario had arrived, but it looked nothing like they'd imagined. Instead of a blood-soaked nightmare, they got a casual walk and a polite request for snacks. Instead of mourning a lost colleague, they faced the complete collapse of their understanding of this world. The reality was somehow more disturbing than their fears had been, because at least fear made sense. This new development defied every rule they thought they knew. Thornwick's notes exploded with paradoxes that challenged everything he knew. Pages filled with observations that contradicted his training. The creature's metabolic readings suggested it should be hostile. Its biological markers indicated aggression. Yet its behavior showed what could only be described as polite interest. Every instrument reading fought with what his eyes were showing him. The doctor kept adjusting his equipment, convinced the sensors must be malfunctioning. But the data remained stubbornly inconsistent with reality. The most dangerous predator appears to prefer treats and conversation to chaos, he wrote. His handwriting grew increasingly erratic as he tried to document the impossible. He noted how the creature would wait patiently for offerings rather than taking what it wanted. How it made soft clicking sounds when pleased rather than aggressive displays. How it seemed more interested in social interaction than hunting behavior. Each observation felt like dismantling another piece of established xenobiology. Centuries of xenobiology dogma started crumbling under the weight of trail mix evidence. All those thick textbooks about predator-prey dynamics, the extensive research on hostile first contacts, the entire framework of understanding alien life through threat assessment, none of it accounted for a creature that would trade lethal capability for raisins. The very foundations of their science seemed to be cracking under the pressure of this single counterexample. Bloom Patal's security protocols were suddenly useless against something that just wanted snacks. Her extensive binders contained procedures for neutralizing threats, establishing defensive perimeters, and conducting hostile engagement. None addressed how to handle a creature that would sit quietly waiting for treats. The defense systems remained active but unnecessary. The weapons stayed aimed but unfired. The entire security apparatus had become irrelevant in the face of this new paradigm. The crew's fear began its slow, awkward transformation into bewildered curiosity. People started peering through viewports instead of avoiding them. The tense postures gradually relaxed into uncertain leaning. Conversations shifted from emergency procedures to whispered questions about what was happening. That thick atmosphere of dread started thinning into something like confused wonder. The change happened slowly, like ice melting under unexpected sunshine. They watched as Jake demonstrated that Mr. Whiskers would sit for raisins but not for commands. The creature would lower itself gracefully when offered the dried fruit, but ignored any attempt at verbal instruction. It responded to tone and gesture rather than specific words. It would accept treats from an open palm but showed no interest in performing tricks. The interaction had its own rhythm that defied traditional training methods. This wasn't obedience. It was participation in a social exchange nobody had offered before. The creature engaged because it found the interaction rewarding, not because it was being controlled. It initiated contact as often as it responded to it. It brought interesting leaves or shiny stones to trade for snacks. The relationship developed as a two-way street rather than a dominance hierarchy. It was less about training and more about establishing mutual understanding. The acid saliva that could melt titanium was now being used to politely accept food offerings. That terrifying biological weapon became a precise tool for delicate interactions. The creature would extend its tongue with careful control, taking just the offered food without touching skin. The corrosive enzymes remained inactive during these exchanges. What should have been a lethal threat became part of a gentle social ritual. Enhanced stealth capabilities were employed to sneak up for more treats rather than attacks. The creature would appear unexpectedly near the perimeter fence, not as a threat but as a visitor hoping for snacks. It moved with that same silent efficiency, but now the approach signaled anticipation rather than danger. Its ability to blend with shadows became a way to observe human activity without causing alarm. The very traits that made it terrifying now made it an interesting guest. Science met snacks, and snacks were winning. All their advanced technology, their extensive research, their carefully developed protocols, none of it mattered against the simple power of dried fruit and friendly interaction. The creature responded to basic social cues better than it did to any scientific approach. The entire expedition's purpose shifted from studying threats to understanding this new form of communication. The universe had presented them with a paradox wrapped in trail mix. The Cathera 7 incident proved that sometimes the expert is the one who doesn't know the rules. While seasoned professionals followed established protocols, Jake operated on instinct and curiosity. His lack of familiarity with standard procedures became an unexpected advantage rather than a liability. Where others saw rigid guidelines, he saw interesting possibilities waiting to be explored. This reversal of conventional wisdom raised uncomfortable questions about expertise and preparedness. Jake's ignorance of proper protocol became his greatest asset in seeing possibilities. He hadn't memorized the threat assessment manuals or internalized the safety briefings. His mind remained open to what actually existed rather than what he'd been told to expect. That cognitive flexibility allowed him to notice things the experts missed because they were too busy confirming their existing assumptions. His fresh perspective turned out to be more valuable than years of specialized training. Where professionals saw threats, he saw potential friends who might like snacks. The difference wasn't just attitude, it was fundamental perception. The security team observed biological weapon systems while Jake noticed social behaviors. The science team recorded danger indicators while he noted curiosity signals. This perceptual gap meant they were essentially studying different creatures while looking at the same animals. Their training had taught them what to fear rather than what to notice. This challenges the very foundation of how we approach the unknown throughout the universe. Centuries of space exploration have been built on caution and defensive preparedness. We've assumed that new environments and species represent potential dangers requiring careful management. The Murphy protocols suggest we might have been approaching things backward all along. What if the unknown isn't inherently hostile but merely unfamiliar? It suggests that our fear-based responses might be creating the dangers we anticipate. Defensive postures often read as aggression across species lines. Weapons readiness signals hostile intent. Security measures communicate distrust. We may have been triggering the very reactions we sought to avoid through our own cautious behaviors. The environment reflects back what we project onto it, creating self-fulfilling prophecies of conflict. Positive reinforcement and social bonding could be more universal than we imagined. These approaches work across human cultures and now appear effective across species boundaries. The fundamental desire for connection might be more widespread than the tendency toward aggression. Creatures we classified as hostile might simply have been waiting for someone to approach them properly. The common language of the universe might be kindness rather than force. The Murphy protocols aren't just about making friends. They're about redefining safety. Security no longer means thicker armor or better weapons. It means deeper understanding and stronger relationships. Protection comes from mutual respect rather than defensive capability. The protocols shift the focus from physical safety to social security, which proves both more effective and more sustainable in the long term. True security might come from understanding rather than fortification. Knowing a creature's preferences and behaviors provides better protection than any shield. Understanding social dynamics prevents conflicts before they start. Relationships create natural safeguards that equipment cannot match. The most secure position isn't behind reinforced walls, but within a network of mutual respect and cooperation. The most dangerous weapon in the galaxy turned out to be trail mix and a friendly attitude. This revelation upends military strategy and diplomatic approach simultaneously. Something as simple as offering food with open hands proves more effective than advanced weapons technology. A positive demeanor achieves what threat displays cannot. The humble snack becomes the ultimate tool for galactic peace. And that changes everything about how we'll explore the stars from now on. Ships will carry cultural specialists alongside security teams. First contact protocols will emphasize gift-giving over show of force. The entire ethos of space exploration shifts from conquest to connection. We'll approach new worlds as potential partners rather than potential threats. The universe becomes a place of welcome rather than danger. So the next time someone tells you not to go out there alone, maybe reconsider. Sometimes the biggest threats in the universe are just creatures who need a friend and patience and interesting snacks. The vast cosmic dangers we imagine might just be social opportunities we haven't explored yet. That entire philosophy of risk avoidance misses what might be gained through engagement. The universe might simply be waiting for someone to approach it with friendly curiosity instead of defensive skepticism. We've been preparing for battles when we should have been packing trail mix and practicing conversational openers. Subscribe for more stories about how snacks are changing interstellar politics. You know when you put a golden retriever in a room full of cats? That was Jake among these professionals. He moved through the base with an easy bounce in his step while everyone else glided with that careful, measured pace of people who've trained for worst-case scenarios. His cheerful obliviousness created awkward little moments in the mess hall, where he'd try to make small talk about the local flora, while scientists debated atmospheric toxicity levels. The security team would be running drills with pulse rifles, and he'd ask if they'd seen the interesting bird things with 6 wings. Dr. Thornwick operated on pure, instrument-driven panic, watching atmospheric readings like they were his own heartbeat. He barely slept, just sipped stimulants and murmured numbers to himself about particulate densities and trace toxin concentrations. Every fluctuation in the environmental sensors made him twitch. He developed this little finger-tapping ritual every time the radiation monitors spiked, which was often. The man had 3 different emergency evacuation plans memorized, and could probably recite them backward under sedation. Commander Bloom Patel had binders full of safety procedures that could probably stop a small asteroid impact. Her office looked like a library of worst-case scenarios with color-coded tabs for everything from biological contamination to seismic events. She conducted daily briefings that felt more like preparing for an invasion than a research mission. Every team member carried laminated emergency cards with 16 steps for surviving hostile fauna encounters. The commander's idea of casual conversation was asking about your containment suit maintenance schedule. Jake treated the whole expedition like a field trip to the galaxy's most exciting zoo. He kept a personal log on his datapad filled with observations about pretty rock formations and interesting leaf shapes. While others scanned for life signs, he tried to photograph the 6-winged birds he'd nicknamed Flappy Things. His supply requests included extra snack packs and a better camera lens instead of the additional medical supplies everyone else wanted. He seemed genuinely disappointed when they told him he couldn't collect samples without full hazardous materials protocols. The mismatch was almost beautiful in its absurdity. Military-grade paranoia meets college intern enthusiasm. You had grown professionals who'd survived 3 frontier missions arguing about perimeter defense strategies, while the kid from accounting wondered if the purple trees would look good in his vacation photos. The security team would be testing the electrified fences, and Jake would ask if they thought the local animals might want to be friends. It created this wonderful cognitive dissonance that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. Bloom Patel tried to drill into him the gravity. This planet has a death wish and really good life insurance. She sat him down in her office with charts showing mortality rates from previous expeditions. She explained how the acid rain could dissolve his boots in under 30 seconds. She detailed how the local predators could smell human fear pheromones from 2 kilometers away. She used phrases like lethal ecosystem and hostile biosphere with the seriousness of someone reading a death sentence. Jake's response: "Looks pretty. Kind of like Earth, but with more purple trees and bigger weird bird things." He nodded along politely, but his eyes kept drifting to the window where the violet leaves swayed in the toxic breeze. He asked if anyone had tried feeding the bird things yet. He wondered aloud if the acidic soil might be good for growing tomatoes. The commander actually put her head in her hands for a solid minute after that conversation. Thornwick's base camp fortification would make a paranoid dictator nod with approval. He'd arranged the sensor arrays in overlapping patterns that covered every approach vector. The automated defense systems could identify and track 27 different threat classifications simultaneously. The emergency bunker could withstand direct impacts from most known energy weapons. Every piece of equipment had radiation shielding and environmental seals tested against extreme conditions. It was less a research camp and more a fortress waiting for a siege. But human bravado, especially the intern variety, operates on different physics than galactic risk assessments. Jake's confidence came from never having seen anything truly dangerous beyond a paper cut from filing paperwork. His risk evaluation system ranked things on a scale of boring to interesting rather than safe to lethal. He genuinely believed that being friendly would solve most problems because it always had before. The concept of something that wouldn't respond to cheerful conversation simply didn't compute in his worldview. The stage was set for the most predictable disaster in xenobiology history. Every professional in the camp knew it was coming. They'd all seen that look in Jake's eyes, the one that said, "I'm going to do something profoundly stupid because I don't know any Better. The security team started taking bets on how long it would take him to wander off. The scientists had pools going on what would eventually get him. Nobody doubted that something would. They just didn't know when. So they gave themselves 3 days before the real trouble started. Optimistic, really. The countdown began the moment they broke atmosphere, with every specialist certain something would go wrong but hoping their preparations might buy them a little grace period. 3 days felt ambitious for a planet that had killed experienced teams in under 6 hours. But hope springs eternal, even on worlds where the soil actively tries to digest your boots. The crew moved through those first hours with the tense anticipation of people waiting for the other shoe to drop. Except here, every shoe was potentially venomous. Every hour brought new readings that made Thornwick's complexion shift to various shades of pale. His monitoring station flickered with data that would give a normal person nightmares. Atmospheric pressure swings that could rupture human lungs. Toxin concentrations that spiked without warning. Thermal scans showing predator movements just beyond the perimeter that vanished before defenses could lock on. He developed this nervous habit of wiping his brow even though the environmental controls kept the base at a perfect temperature. The man looked like he was watching his own vital signs decline in real time. Bloom Patel ran drills until the crew could probably disassemble and reassemble their gear in their sleep. Emergency evacuation procedures were practiced until everyone could hit their assigned stations blindfolded. Weapon maintenance drills happened 3 times daily. Perimeter breach scenarios were run so often that the security team started dreaming about them. She had people practicing suit seal checks until their fingers cramped. The commander believed in muscle memory the way some people believe in religion as the only thing that might save you when everything goes wrong. Jake spent his time taking pictures of the weird bird things and apparently not reading any of the safety manuals. His datapad filled with blurry photos of 6-winged creatures perched on poisonous branches. He'd stand at the observation window for hours just watching the way the violet leaves moved in the acid wind. The stack of emergency protocol binders in his quarters remained perfectly stacked and clearly unopened. He asked the cook if they could try cooking some of the local fungi, which made the medical officer actually snort coffee through his nose. The tension built like pressure in a faulty airlock. Something had to give eventually. You could feel it in the way people stopped making eye contact in the halls. The nervous laughter that died sooner each day. The way everyone jumped at normal system noises. The environmental controls hummed a little louder. The lights seemed to flicker more often. Every alert chime made 3 people reach for weapons. The base felt like it was holding its breath waiting for the inevitable disaster. You could see it coming from orbit. The intern was going to do something profoundly stupid. The security team had a betting pool going about what it would be. Would he touch the glowing plants? Try to pet something that could remove his arm? Sample the water that could dissolve his sampling equipment? The odds changed daily based on his behavior. The head of security kept increasing the stakes like someone watching a storm approach and knowing exactly where it would hit. It's practically a universal law. Give an intern 3 days on a death planet, they'll wander off. Something about that combination of curiosity and incomplete risk assessment creates a perfect storm of poor decision-making. They see danger signs as interesting challenges. Warning labels become invitations. The very protocols designed to keep them safe just make the outside world seem more intriguing. It's not rebellion. It's just a fundamental mismatch between training and temperament. The crew's dread became a physical presence in the camp, thick enough to taste. It was in the recycled air and the recycled conversations. People spoke in hushed tones even in secure areas. The mess hall served the same meals, but nobody really tasted them. Everyone moved with that careful economy of motion that people use when they're trying not to attract attention. The environment outside was lethal, but the atmosphere inside was slowly becoming unbearable. You know how every sci-fi horror story starts with someone saying, "Don't go out there alone"? Well, meet Jake Murphy, the intern who not only wandered off from the most fortified research base in the galaxy, but came back with the apex predator they were all terrified of. While Dr. Thornwick was monitoring atmospheric toxicity levels and Commander Bloom Paddle was running search protocols, Jake was making friends with a creature classified as a Class A galactic threat, using trail mix in casual conversation. Picture this. A ship drops out of hyperspace above a world that looks like Earth's angry cousin. The planet hung there spinning like a bruised fruit, all dark purples and angry reds under swirling atmospheric bands that looked less like weather patterns and more like visible radiation. Everything about it screamed, "Do not approach," in a language even the ship's AI could understand. The scanners picked up electromagnetic storms that would fry unshielded electronics and gravity, fluctuations that made the artificial gravity generators stutter. The academic endeavor wasn't just any research vessel. It was a floating panic room with engines, triple reinforced hull plating that could withstand micrometeorite impacts at half-light speed, atmospheric scrubbers rated for Class 1 toxic environments, and enough emergency protocols to paper the walls of a small moon. Every system had redundant backups for its redundant backups. The ship's design philosophy seemed to be that everything outside the hull actively wanted to kill the crew. And honestly, the designers weren't wrong. Dr. Thornwick's instruments went nuts the moment they entered orbit, flashing more warnings than a malfunctioning toaster. His console lit up with so many red alerts it looked like a festival display. Atmospheric composition readings showed trace elements that could dissolve human tissue on contact. Thermal scans picked up geothermal vents spewing compounds that defied standard chemical classification. Radiation levels fluctuated between concerning and immediately fatal, depending on which hemisphere they scanned. The good doctor started making that little anxious humming sound he always made when contemplating imminent death. Commander Bloom Patel had protocols for protocols, each one designed to keep them from becoming alien appetizers. There were binders on proper suit maintenance, atmospheric decontamination, perimeter security, emergency evacuation, and hostile flora-fauna engagement. Each protocol had sub-protocols, and those had contingency plans, and those had backup scenarios. The commander could probably recite the proper procedure for surviving a volcanic eruption while being chased by carnivorous plants while half asleep. Preparation was her love language, and she was composing a sonnet. Cathera 7's reputation preceded it. The Galactic Wildlife Federation basically stamped, "Absolutely do not land," on all its files. Expedition teams that had visited before either never returned or came back with fewer members and traumatic stress disorders that required specialized therapy. The few survivors' accounts described ecosystems that seemed actively malicious, with plants that moved toward heat signatures and animals that displayed what could only be described as tactical hunting behaviors. The planet's file contained more blacked-out sections than readable text, which is never a good sign. The atmosphere could poison you. The flora wanted to eat you, and the fauna considered humans premium-grade snacks. Breathing the air unassisted would cause respiratory failure within minutes. Touching most plant life resulted in chemical burns or neurotoxin exposure. The local wildlife showed adaptation patterns suggesting they'd evolved to consume anything that didn't originate on their world. With digestive systems that could process materials ranging from organic matter to certain metal alloys, it was the kind of place that made hell look like a vacation destination with slightly poor weather. But the real star of this horror show was the Shadow Stalker. Enhanced stealth, titanium-grade claws, acid saliva. Thermal imaging barely registered them, their body temperature matching ambient conditions exactly. Their claws could shred reinforced plating with casual swipes. Their saliva contained enzymes that dissolved most known materials, which they used both for hunting and apparently for grooming. They moved through the dense purple forests without disturbing a leaf, appearing and disappearing like living shadows. Behavioral analysts determined it had what they called a sadistic sense of humor about its prey. They didn't just hunt, they toyed with their food. There were reports of them herding prey into dead ends just to watch the panic. They'd sometimes disable rather than kill, apparently enjoying the struggle. One account described a stalker that systematically dismantled a survey team's equipment over 3 days before finally attacking, as if demonstrating the utter uselessness of their technology against its capabilities. The crew's anxiety was palpable. They'd basically built a fortress in the middle of a death trap. The landing site became a compound with electrified perimeter fences, motion sensors, automated defense turrets, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor every square meter within a kilometer radius. Everyone moved with that tense, careful posture of people who know any mistake could be their last. The atmosphere inside was thick with controlled fear and the constant hum of protective systems working overtime. And then there was Jake, the intern, who thought the purple trees were pretty. While everyone else saw biological hazards and death traps, He noticed the way the sunlight made the violet leaves glow at dawn. He commented on the interesting geometric patterns in the local rock formations. He asked if anyone had tried tasting the glowing berries, which made the security team lead actually choke on his coffee. The disconnect between his perception and reality was both terrifying and somehow magnificent.